You are listening to the Brought to Light Masonic Podcast, a podcast for Freemasons and the public, bringing you to light through discussions and research papers about Australian Freemasonry and the Victorian jurisdiction in particular.
Welcome back to the Brought to Light Masonic Podcast. This is episode 8 of the podcast, and today we'll be talking about Rosicrucianism and Freemasonry. I'm your host, Brother Jack Aquilina, and this will be the first time since the podcast got released on the 2nd of July this year that you'll have a single host, just me. But I'm lucky to be joined later on by Jason Mitchell, who is an American Freemason, who will be assisting us with the topic, Rosicrucianism. For the purpose of this episode, we wanted to discuss Rosicrucianism and Freemasonry because there's actually quite a distinct relationship between Rosicrucianism, the old Rosicrucian legend and order, and what today is modern Freemasonry. Let me just say from the outset, though, the following. The Brought to Light Masonic Podcast did extend an invitation to the Societas Rosiucruciana in Anglica, which is the Masonic Rosicrucian body here in Victoria, to participate in this podcast and simply to talk about what it is they do and the benefits of being a Rosicrucian Freemason here in Victoria. Unfortunately, they've decided not to accept that offer, and they've decided that they would prefer to participate another time. So we've decided to proceed with this topic regardless because of how important we believe it to be. But I just wish to say to the SRIA, the invitation is always open to you. You're always welcome to participate in this podcast, and we hope to have you on in the future. The same goes for AMORC, which is a non-Masonic Rosicrucian order, which many Freemasons happen to be members of. They have decided, after an invitation, not to participate in this podcast either, and we'd like to extend an open invitation to them to participate at any future date. You're always welcome. We're here to bring people to light, and your information, going out to our listeners, will assist them to do that. And on a lighter note, we'll commence our interview with Jason Mitchell, who is an American Freemason who's kindly offered to give us his time. Jason is a very astute Rosicrucian Freemason, and I hope you enjoy the interview we have with him. Some of the stuff he says is quite technical, so please keep up with us. But otherwise, any books or papers we refer to, also try and catch them as well. Hope you enjoy the interview. Well, I'd like to welcome Jason Mitchell, who is a friend of Brother Robert Johnson from the United States, who's kindly agreed, on short notice, to appear on the Brought to Light Masonic podcast to talk about Rosicrucianism, and particularly its link to Freemasonry. Thank you for coming on the show today, Jason.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I thought the first thing we'd do is, as we tend to do on this podcast, is get to know a little bit about you. You did send me your Masonic resume, and it's quite impressive. So let's start with, where are you from, and how did you stumble upon Freemasonry?
So I'm currently living in Salt Lake City, Utah, and stumbling across Freemasonry, it's kind of always been there in my life. While I have I suppose it may be standard story where I had family members who were Freemasons, I didn't really know them Masonically. My introduction to Freemasonry largely came out of an interest in history and the philosophies that gave rise to much of what we would nowadays call occultism.
Okay, so your interest in the occult led you to a fascination with Freemasonry.
Yeah, that'd be a good summary of it. What brought me to actually do petition wasn't so much the interest in Hermeticism, esotericism, etc. It was more of an interest in just trying to find a community of men and mentors. So for me, brotherhood is really the foundation of my Masonic experience. Everything else is just a bonus.
Yeah, that's very interesting you say that. It's sort of a similar experience for me, and a lot of people I know, they tend to put up this false dichotomy. They say, oh, you're either a fraternal brother in the sense you've joined for brotherhood, or you only joined because you're interested in esoterics and research. It's true that you can obviously enjoy both sides of Freemasonry, isn't it? So that's interesting. In terms of your jurisdiction, tell us a little bit about the Grand Lodge that you're obviously belonging to in terms of the craft, and how it all works out that way.
So I belong to the Grand Lodge of Utah, the most worshipful Grand Lodge, free and accepted Masons of Utah. We are currently the second smallest jurisdiction in North America. So that we probably only have about 1,700 Master Masons in the entire state.
Oh, wow.
So we are very small, we are very intimate, but we are also spread out over an exceptionally large area in comparison to other small jurisdictions, both in the U.S. and internationally.
So it's spread quite thin, and the numbers, like every other jurisdiction, are they decreasing, or are you guys bucking the trend and increasing your numbers?
We're bottoming out. We've had years of growth here recently. We've still had some years of losses, but those losses are very small, where we're talking like 17 people or 20 people.
Well, that's good.
So we like to think that we're at the bottom of that draw, and we'll be able to start turning it around and heading up, because we've already seen it for 2 years in a row previously. So,
well, I wish you guys all the best with that. We've got similar problems here down in Victoria in Australia, and we're hoping that we've reached our bottom. But from here, it's a focus on recruiting quality over quantity, and trying to make sure that we get good people into the order. Okay, well, that's good. In terms of, I was just having a look at your Masonic resume here, Jason, and it looks like you are a petition alcoholic. You know, you've taken on everything that you possibly can. I love it. I'm a member of some of the orders that you're a member of. But let's talk about so you're a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemason. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And tell me about that. I mean, just briefly, everyone hears about this 33rd degree, and obviously the conspiracy theorists run crazy with it. Tell us, is it all it's cracked out to be, or was it what you expected?
Well, it is and it isn't. Despite having a great skill with Google, I specifically never looked into the degree. I certainly looked into the history and the development of it, but I never actually went out looking for it. Not because I ever knew or thought I was going to get it, but having cheated and looked ahead for my craft degrees, I kind of learned that mistake, not to repeat it.
Yeah, not to ruin the surprise. Exactly right.
Exactly. So I had no preconceptions going into it.
Okay.
But I will say, and I've said this before on other podcasts, that if you think that the 33rd holds the secret of Scottish Rite philosophy, or the 33rd holds the mystic key that unlocks everything, you are sadly mistaken in that way.
Yeah.
Everything you need to know about the Scottish Rite, at least in my jurisdiction, the southern jurisdiction of the U.S., every jurisdiction is going to be different. All the philosophy, all the really good meat, the wonderful stuff is in degrees 1 through 32. So if you somehow think those 33rds are sitting there holding it, that's not the way it works. Like much of Masonic leadership, it is we've liked what you've done, so we're going to give you more. Congratulations on more responsibility.
You looked in the eye of those people, and they've obviously given you that honour. The thing. I spoke to a couple of 33rd degrees out here in the Australian Rite of the Scottish Rite, and they told me the same thing. Basically, you do your 33rd degree, and all of a sudden you're expected to do things. Basically they're on the administration of the order out here. So there you go. I think it's a bit of myth dispelling. I thought we'd jump on that opportunity, since I haven't spoken to many 33rd degree Freemasons on this podcast. But thank you for that. Look, let's talk about the Masonic Rosicrucian movement that's happening in the United States, obviously, and tell us a little bit more about the particular one you belong to. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce the full name. You probably got a better grasp on it than me. So tell us all about that, and I'll just also let our listeners know that you are the Deputy Chief Adept. So I'm guessing that's the equivalent of the Deputy Grand Master of the order. Is that right?
Well, at least in the jurisdiction. So in the United States, the Rosicrucian Society, so the Societas Rosiucruciana and Civitatibus Foederatis, is broken up. There's roughly one college for each state. Not every state has a college. Some have two based on size and population, but it's roughly one per state. So in my state, yes, I would be the second in charge.
Okay, and how did you join this society? I mean, obviously
we're an invitation only society, and we are in amity with the society in Anglia, so England, and in Scotland, Scotia, as well as Lusitania, so that's Portugal and Canada. Okay. So we all form, an overarching Masonic Rosicrucian society across those nations.
And so is that a formal link or an informal link between all those different orders?
It's mostly hereditary.
Okay.
So everyone, in theory, can trace themselves back to Scotland.
Yes. Okay.
Now, there's always, some grandstanding that gets involved. But we all share that same societal lineage. We all share very strong ritualistic associations. Just for fun, I was overlooking the English ritual again yesterday before this, and it's striking how similar our rituals are. The changes are very minute.
Which is fantastic, because I know that a lot of things got lost after the Revolutionary War in the United States, at least with craft Freemasonry. England broke off and didn't recognise a lot of the lodges out there, and during the colonial period, and I guess they say that the ritual, you guys picked up a lot of the ancients' customs and didn't pick up a lot of the reform that happened. But so you're saying with the Rosicrucian order, it looks like it's been kept pretty much the same, with give or take a few differences.
Correct.
Oh, that's good. And you joined, so you're invitation only. And so who invited you? Did you seek it out, or did someone mention it to you and it was like, oh, that sounds interesting? Or how did you get onto Rosicrucianism in particular?
Well, so the best way to get invited here in the States, and now having said that, I'm somewhat reluctant to accept that phrase, to get invited.
Yes.
Invitations go out to individuals who are already demonstrating some sort of aptitude within the broader field of esoterica. So whether it is you have some command of the history, or some command of any of the practical work or the mystical work, if you're already demonstrating those efforts, an invitation will likely, no guarantees, come your way. That said, in other jurisdictions here in the U.S., other states, it club for past Grand Masters.
Oh, okay.
So it runs a very broad spectrum of who you're going to see and run into, be it Masonic movers and shakers to esoteric movers and shakers.
So a good blend of different groups of people. Okay.
Correct. So I don't necessarily know what led me to getting invited. I was originally invited out in Colorado because there was no college in Utah. Mm-hmm. We were in Colorado for 2 years when the opportunity presented itself to create a college here in Utah. And we seized that opportunity, and we've been successful since then. And I hope that we remain successful.
Well, it's good to see that you've taken that initiative. And yeah, in terms of what you're saying, from what I understand how it works here in Australia, and I'm not sure if it's, obviously it's a bit different in the United States in terms of the invitational stuff. I know that you can approach SRIA in Australia and sit down with them and express an interest, and they just basically say, well, yeah, we'll send you an invitation. But I guess that's sort of a reflective of maybe lack of numbers. I'm not sure what the reasoning behind that is. But it's interesting to see the difference, because I think in Australia we don't really have many truly invitational orders left. And it's interesting to see that you've got obviously a very strong tradition of invitation only, which there's nothing wrong with. I think it's quite an interesting way of doing things. Okay, so you got the invitation, you got involved, and clearly you loved it, because you've gone all the way up to the second in charge of your state.
Indeed. I've always been aware of the society, being just, as you can tell from my history, I have a problem saying no.
Yeah.
So I was very much aware of it, but I wasn't something I was actively seeking out. So the invitation came very surprising.
Yep.
It was, especially across state lines like that.
Yeah,
while there was no problem with that, I certainly wasn't known amongst the society members in Colorado. So just exactly how they came across my name and what convinced them that I would be a good fit, I will probably never know.
Well, that's very interesting. It's good. It's probably interesting to speculate on. But, well, that's good. Thank you for giving us a rundown of your Masonic history. I know there's a lot we've left out, but I think we've got the crux of it. In terms of the topic of Rosicrucianism, I know a lot of people hear this word and a lot of things are conjured up. And like you said, the internet, it's probably better you don't read it sometimes. There's a lot of sort of misconceptions about Freemasonry and sort of fraternal traditions. Let's talk a little bit about Rosicrucianism from its historical perspective. I'm talking back to the times of the Fama Fraternitatis and also the Confessio Fraternitatis. These documents were obviously very special at their time, and they've had left a mark on history. Could you tell us a little bit about the history of early Rosicrucianism? So
staying within the realm of history and not blending legend and history here. So Rosicrucianism really started within the Tübingen circle. So this was Johannes Valentinus André and pretty much his small community of academics and professionals within the academic community and somewhat of the royal community based out of Tübingen, Germany. And they really saw themselves or saw an opportunity to reform the world. This is not long after Martin Luther challenged the hegemony of the Catholic Church in Germany. Germany itself was poised upon a great deal of cultural and political change. And they came out with these documents advocating for their vision of a reformed Christian world. And a lot of it was very lyrical, a lot of it was very mythological, and that really resonated with a lot of people across a number of different disciplines. You had those that saw this as a Christian movement. You have those that saw this as an academic movement. You have those that saw this as a political movement. And it took hold, and it carried out that way. And the work of Tobias Churton talks about this quite a bit. Christopher McIntosh talks about this. There's a great book out there called The Rosicrucian Enlightenment, which, while it hasn't, most of its ideas haven't stood the test of time and research, the core principle that niching Rosicrucianism is into this small little occult idea really diminishes the impact that it had across a wide number of disciplines within what would eventually become, the Holy Roman Empire and beyond.
Yeah.
So this was a very profound movement.
It seems like, from my readings of it, and you can obviously fill in the gaps, it happened during a period of time where you'd had these centuries of sort of suppression of thought and expression, and these ideas of being able to simply question and look for these sort of, hermetic traditions and all the rest of it. Like you said, there was political concepts to it. There was philosophical concepts to it. There was so many different disciplines brought together. But maybe, I guess I'm asking, this is informed by the fact that at the time there was a hunger. There was a hunger for cultural change in the way we thought about the world and the world around us, I'm guessing. Is that right?
Well, absolutely. To bring together these Neoplatonic ideas and have them tinged with Hermeticism, but also at the time, alchemy was science.
Yes.
And they're embracing math, and you have almost this unified theory of faith and reason, which we don't currently have in this world any longer, to bring them together and say, this is the path towards this new golden age to reach the city on the hill. It was very profound, and it spoke to a lot of people, especially within the German world, where they were, at least in the words of Tobias Churton, they were struggling for a sort of mythological national identity. They didn't have the power of Rome behind them. They didn't have this great saga of Charlemagne that the French had.
So as a way of obviously forming this national identity, and more importantly, setting this course towards a new, ordered, enlightened society, which is very interesting.
Absolutely,
very, very interesting. Okay, and let's. I think that's unless there's anything else you think that we particularly need to add to that. I think that's actually a brilliant summary, at least for the layman who hasn't heard about Rosicrucianism.
So yeah, that's the core of where it started. Where it's gone from there, as I no doubt we'll get into, has been a very varied course.
Very interesting. Okay, well, let's talk about some themes. I think about what at least my research indicated. There were a lot of themes in this sort of tradition, and I want to sort of get your views on a few of them. And obviously, feel free to chuck in your own ideas about what sort of themes we're missing. But first thing, we hear about this a lot. Let's talk about alchemic principles and alchemy. From what I understand, alchemy, in its practical sense, is the quest of turning metals into gold. At least that's how I interpret it. There's obviously a lot more to it. Let's talk about it. Let's get your view on what alchemy is and how it relates to the Rosicrucian tradition.
Well, specifically within the Masonic Rosicrucian tradition, the Masonic Rosicrucian orders, so the various Societas Rosiucruciana, are all descended, at least ritualistically, from a German society called the Golden Rosenkreuz, or the Golden Rosy Cross.
Yep.
And it was very much an operative alchemical order. And they, in addition to the theory of alchemy, they were very much involved in the creation of what could probably loosely called spagyrics. That is, they were looking for healing elixirs, the ability to make the world better, both philosophically, but in terms of the body. They were looking to cure diseases, they were looking to cure ailments, etc. So within the Masonic tradition, being descended from that group, alchemy informs a great deal of our ritualistic content, both overtly and inadvertently. But also bear in mind that this was a Christian movement, and the Golden Rosenkreuz were a conservative Christian movement of their day. So everything is formed within that Christian mission of the coming of Christ, the healing of the world, and how to proceed along those lines within the alchemical view of what Christ may be.
Yes, which is very interesting, and I did notice in a lot of the readings I'd done, there's this sort of common theme of purification, which is obviously very consistent with the story of Christ. This concept of, obviously, what did I read? I'm reading a book called The Rosicrucian Enlightenment Revisited, and there's quite a few good essays in that little book about aspects of this, and they talk about aspects of the Holy Grail and all these other things about seeking lost knowledge, or seeking this idea of finding the cure to purifying humanity. I thought that was quite interesting, and obviously that's the alchemic sort of tradition, and obviously, like you said, it's very influential on a lot of societies. Some would even argue the craft to an extent. Especially this concept of transition or change. Tell me about this, the Hermetic sciences. Obviously, I think you've touched on it a little bit already, but give us an idea of how that tradition fits into the whole Rosicrucian concept, at least from the Masonic point of view.
Well, from the Masonic point of view, the Hermetic sciences play a lesser role than the alchemical ones. They are certainly present in the ritual, and you are encouraged to look at them within the grades of the society. They largely come into the Rosicrucian tradition, though, however, through the chemical wedding, which is probably the most overtly esoteric of all of the three founding manifestos of Rosicrucianism. And so from there, at least within the Masonic Rosicrucian sense, the big push into Hermeticism comes through an encouragement to study theosophy and the great religions of the world, which specifically would call out the ancient Greek traditions. So from there, you fall into Neoplatonic ideas, which then immediately lends itself into the classical Hermetic ideas.
Yep. Okay, and that's something I noticed as well in terms of the Platonic and even to an extent Pythagoras. These sorts of schools of thought, these old schools of thought, were something that were reinvigorated, almost in an Enlightenment approach towards rethinking the way we view the world. I mean, is this a theme of trying to discover some lost knowledge? Is this something that's cutting through here?
It's a difficult way to phrase it, to say lost knowledge. I mean, the concept of perennial wisdom means it's always true in all times and all places. So I don't know that it's an encouragement to find lost knowledge. It's a revelation that the knowledge is always true and is always present. You just have to have the eyesight to look for it.
Yes, okay. So it's about discovering what's already in front of us, rediscovering what's
yes.
in front of us. That's very, very interesting. Okay, some other things. Let's look at one of the sort of themes I noticed. I was reading another fantastic publication. It's called Freemasons and Rosicrucians, The Enlightened by Manly P. Hall. I'm sure you've heard of it.
Yep.
In terms of some of the themes he was talking about was the exploration of consciousness. Is that something that the ritual invites you to do? And what are you trying to achieve by doing that?
Knowing the context of Hall's work, I don't believe it really invites you to explore consciousness in the way Hall used the word.
Okay.
But it certainly invites you to explore the non-real to explore the depths of your own spirituality, your own identity, your own soul. So in that spirit, yes, it absolutely invites you and encourages you, and I would dare say in the higher grades demands of you to cross that threshold and step into the void.
Yes.
And turn your vision in upon yourself and have the bravery to look at what Jung might have called the shadow and learn to face that and correct it and deal with it.
That's very, very interesting. And that draws obviously a lot of parallels with the Masonic tradition generally, doesn't it? In terms of
it does.
Reflection, know thyself, the concept of knowing who you are. That's very interesting. And the in terms of the another parallel which I noticed was prevalent, and obviously you can correct me because obviously the works of Manly P. Hall have been dissected in a million different ways. The role of the natural laws. You spoke about obviously the re-envisaging of Christ and obviously the concept of this being a Christian movement that was about sort of bringing those ideals back in a different form and path. In terms of the natural laws, maybe some people refer to them as the hidden mysteries of nature and science, these sorts of ideas, how important are they? Are we talking about the laws of God, or are we talking about the laws of physics, or all of those things?
So in the broader sense of Masonic Rosicrucianism, across its variety of manifestations, so not just focusing on the Rosicrucian Society, be it English, Scottish, Canadian, American, what have you, but when you take it out and you look into things, especially within Ecosse or Hautes Grades Masonry that were operating in France and Germany during the mid to late 18th century, absolutely, they embraced one of the concepts of Inrai, that reason would decipher nature's hieroglyphics, that the book of nature is the method of understanding God, understanding yourself, and then applying those lessons in that reason through the axiom as above, so below, that by understanding the book of nature, you can understand or draw an analog to the greater nature, the cosmos, man, your spirit, God himself, the Christ nature, etc. So in that broader sense, absolutely, it is essential. You cannot just focus on and say, oh, well, I'm an esotericist.
Yeah.
You have to embrace reason and faith.
Very interesting. I like that concept that you use, as above, as below, that sort of concept. It's about, I guess if you understand the world around you, the argument is you then become closer to God, which is very, very interesting. And I guess this is sort of something I picked up on. I'm not sure if it's part of the Masonic tradition, but I did obviously pick up on focusing on salts and metals and winds and fires and elements. Is that something you guys focus on, or is that something more of a non-Masonic tradition?
It is certainly present in the ritual. Whether or not you as an individual pick up on that and follow it really is kind of up to the individual.
Yep.
Now, again, that's speaking directly within the Rosicrucian Society. Looking at Masonic Rosicrucianism in the broader sense, there were certainly things like the Hermetic Rite where that was a focused, dedicated study. And not just from the elemental point of view. You got into wet work, you got into dry work of the alchemical schools, and you applied those not just within the sense of what was what we think as classical elements, integrated into certain planetary concepts. Now you're talking into Olympic ideas. Yeah. It could get very profound when you broaden the scope of what you're defining as Masonic Rosicrucianism, especially within the Ecosse and Hautes Grades schools of France, where the craft degrees or the craft legends were really just an excuse to get to the good stuff. And it's interesting because if you look at something like the German Rite of Strict Observance, where they rejected what they called the occult sciences, but right next door, you have the Golden Rosenkreuz, which embraced them. We can't sit here and just say casually that high grade Masonry was back in the 18th century one thing or another. It was clearly both, and people played on both sides of the fences many times.
I guess people are looking for knowledge, weren't they? And I guess they're willing to try all different paths to knowledge. And I can understand why they would do that. Even from my perspective as modern Freemason like you are, you do the craft degrees, and you do feel like, especially after you join a lot of the other orders, you're finally getting to the good stuff. Not that not that there's anything wrong with the craft degrees, but you definitely feel like you're on a journey that's you've been building up to this point for ages, which is very interesting. And in terms of the one other thing I read, which I know that some people asked me in preparation for this interview, what's the relationship with the Egyptian mystic schools? Is this something that's sort of been perpetuated, or is there actually a link here to Osiris and some of those sort of old legends from back in ancient Egypt?
It really is a contested subject.
Yep.
In terms of hardcore professional historian, I don't think any of them are willing to come out and say yes one way or yes another. Certainly, there were people who, when they created these degrees, believed it existed. There were others that didn't believe it existed. There were some, and I kind of fall in this school, who believe it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
The truth of the universe, to me, I don't care if it was discovered by some regal Egyptian academic, several thousand years ago, or the wisdom comes from, my daughter when she just spouts off of something that just fundamentally changes the way I look at everything. Yeah. The truth is truth. And to me, that goes back to what I said earlier about perennial wisdom. It's always true. It's not, it used to be true and now we're rediscovering it after a period of darkness. The darkness is ourselves. We blind ourselves to it. It's always true. It's omnipresent through time and space. So if you're looking for a definitive answer as to whether or not Rosicrucianism in general or in specific, it can be tied directly back to the ancient mystery schools of Egypt, I don't know. Certainly there are ideas that have survived. Astrology, that's Babylonian. It still exists to this day. I mean, we still use Babylonian math in our clocks and in our time. So, but I don't know that would necessarily say that the clock on my wall is Babylonian.
I think you've touched on a very fundamental part of the human condition. This concept of we're always trying to attribute some form of responsibility, power, credit, all these things to our understanding of the world around us. And I know science in particular is pretty guilty of this. Who discovered this and who did that, and it was this person or that person, which is all great to give people credit where credit's due. But like you said, I think we need to focus more on what the result of those understandings are. What is the actual things that have been sort of brought to our attention. And I think that's a very interesting analysis you've given of the human condition generally, maybe unintentionally, but it is very interesting because that's a lot of things that happen in terms of preparing for these interviews. I get a lot of questions put to me about ask someone this, ask someone that, and it all really comes down to who gets credit for what and is this legend true. But like you said, allegories, legends, these things aren't important. It's the lessons we take from those contemplating such stories and legends and allegories that are important. So
exactly,
it's very interesting.
Exactly.
Okay, well, let's talk about the relationship with craft Freemasonry, if you think there is any, because I think that one thing that I always get asked, at least with the other orders, the Knights Templar being a good example, is, well, why would I become a Knights Templar? I do these 3 craft degrees, and what's the connection? How do they draw that bow? So I guess I'll put the question to you. How do you draw the bow between the relationship between traditional craft Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism?
So, Rosicrucianism, unlike Knights Templar, and I am when it comes to Templary, I am very much in the school that Masonic history and the Knights Templar are divorced. There is no great ancient Gnostic mystery tradition that was carried from the Templars into Masonry. And I've gone many rounds of whiskey and cigars having this conversation, and it's a great one to have, but I'm firmly in the school that there's not a connection. Rosicrucianism is, however, I don't know that we'll ever have enough facts to prove a definitive link, but there are certainly tantalizing places where it crosses over in very unexpected ways. Probably the oldest is a poem called Musa's Threnody, which is from Scotland, and it really is a narrative history of a small little town in Scotland for when they're bringing in some new mayor or some civic official. I forget exactly what, but out of the clear blue sky, they say, we have the second sight, we are the brethren of the Rosy Cross, and we have the Mason's word. And then it just goes away. And it's, what? Go back to that part, let's talk about this.
Don't leave us hanging, exactly right.
It is absolutely, you're just it's, wow, why would that stand out? 1696, there's I guess we would call it, tabloid isn't really the right word, but newspapers had a different sort of look and feel back in the, the late 1600s. But there is a paper called Poor Robin's Intelligence. And again, you see an advertisement, and it's meant to be somewhat satirical, perhaps even, insulting, that the Rosicrucians are going to dine, and they're going to dine invisibly. And oh, by the way, the company of accepted Masons is going to be there too. Now, this is not this is not an operative Masonic work. This is not a place where we would look or traditionally see Masons retconning history. No, this is almost an anti-Masonic advertisement. Yet already culturally, Masonry and Rosicrucianism are inextricably linked.
Yes. And
this is the second time in Scotland this occurs. Another great example where you see the two of them crossing paths is at Edzell Castle in Scotland, where you have the famed Rosicrucian Garden, which was an architectural edifice that was used for moral edification and philosophy, which sounds an awful lot like what we do.
Yep.
And then, oh, by the way, you find out that the family, Ashmole, and the family's been in possession of some of none other than Sir Robert Morey's papers. It's okay, we've got Ashmole, we got Morey, both known early Freemasons, both known early Rosicrucian sympathizers, together in the Scottish court that's assembled at Edzell Castle. Interestingly enough, side story on that, in that surviving correspondence, you have none other than Sir Robert Morey addressing King Charles as a Master Mason.
Very interesting.
So clearly at some point, proto-Masonry, maybe it's not Freemasonry as we would necessarily identify it today with the Hiramic legend or even Noahide legends, but certainly there's a proto-Masonry that's going on in Scotland that we have documentary evidence of that shows, outside of just their cloistered little communities, within the larger cultural context, accepted Masonry and Rosicrucianism being linked.
So there's definitely a marriage of tradition, which is very interesting. And
absolutely.
It's good that you've sort of pointed out that early connection, and it makes sense to me. I mean, from what you've said, this concept of enlightenment, understanding, exploration, these sorts of concepts, they marry up very well with modern Freemasonry, at least in terms of the craft. And it makes sense that those traditions would have some form of link. So, but you would side with although you can't be definitive, you would side with the side of the argument that would suggest that there is good evidence that there was a strong link between the two traditions in the early periods.
I would certainly say within Scottish Masonry, absolutely. Now, when you start talking about English Masonry, and I think we do ourselves a historical disservice when we try to look at Masonry historically through one lens, and we don't appreciate that these were varied traditions, and a lot of our arguments and early struggles, ancient, moderns, however you want to frame it, was an evolutionary period of these traditions and schools coming together and learning to survive and make something new.
Yes.
But yeah, definitely within the Scottish schools and the Scottish lodges and the Scottish patron societies where you had accepted Masons and gentlemen Masons, absolutely. Rosicrucianism, if not directly informed it, you were attracting the same people, so there was a certain amount of cross-pollination that occurred.
And that sort of explains how some of these Rosicrucian ideas have made their way into modern Freemasonry, because I'm not sure about the United States, but the Scottish traditions are very influential over here. and obviously it comes from a period of traditions that go back for a very long time, before documented history. One thing that I read, which I'm not sure if you're across, obviously in English history you had the situation of the Civil War in England, the beheading of Charles I, and you had the Cromwellian court during the brief period of the Commonwealth. Now, I read a wonderful article about the resurgence of Rosicrucianism during the Cromwell court. And the reason I wanted to ask you about this is because it's very pertinent to Australian history. We called ourselves the Commonwealth of Australia to the behest of the King at the time, sort of to replicate some of the ideas of the protectorate in England back in the Cromwellian period. I thought it was very interesting that they mentioned this, because I know that Cromwell, his particular approach to Christianity was a very personal approach. The Puritan approach was about a personal relationship with God, getting rid of all those sort of edifices and temples and icons and all these things. Do you think do you know anything about this particular sort of contention, or is there anything you'd like to comment on in regards to that?
Well, I think, maybe not necessarily directly related to Cromwell himself, those revolutions, but I do think, and I have to get the hat tip to an American Mason out of Texas, Pierre Normand, for turning me on to this idea, though I don't know if it's his, but you can't ignore the English Civil War and the contention between England and Scotland in the development of Masonry. And to risk it, but the idea being that in London, in the Great Fire, of course, everyone from across the known empire descends on England to help rebuild London. And London grows and prospers. I mean, it becomes the first modern metropolis. I may be wrong in the specifics, but I want to say it's the first city at least Western city, where you see 1 million people since Rome. And within that, everything is great and fine, until some of the fallout, if I'm getting my history right, of the English Civil War in the form of the Scottish rebellions. England's a great place, but then all of a sudden you start developing this xenophobia. What are those radical Scots going to do?
Yes.
And this ties into French Masonic history, because they say that all Masons in France came over with Charles in 1688.
Yes.
Or is it 1682? Either way, that's their story. But some of the things begin to make sense when you look at it from the context of that premier Grand Lodge. Their goal was to create, not so much out of a sense of ultranaturalism, but preservation. Masonry is great. We are gentlemen Masons. We helped rebuild London and turn it into all to this. But it would really suck if anyone could tie us back to our Scottish origins. So we got to create this ultra-English society, just to get eyes to look away from us, just as a matter of continuing what we're always done. And I don't think it's a coincidence that you first start with an English gentleman, and then you move up, and now you've got members of the Royal Society, and boom, by Grand Master number 4, we've got pure-blooded English nobility.
Yes.
And the first thing that these guys do is start drawing the line about how we are English Masons. Even the history that Anderson writes, it mentions that, there's, several generations back there might be some of that Scottish mud, but we're English now. And when you view from that context, a lot of what develops, especially in France with Écossais Masonry, the French interpretation of Scottish Masonry, the sudden appearance in London in Temple Bar 1733 of the Scots Master degree as a reaction to this ultimate, makes a lot more sense. So in that context, I don't know that it necessarily informs the philosophy of Masonry, but it checks off a lot of the boxes of why did Masonry develop in London way.
It's very interesting, especially considering the huge turmoil. I mean, I know from a constitutional perspective that the Civil War it wreaked havoc on traditional concepts of divine rights of kings and all the rest of it, and it makes sense that these sorts of major turmoil breaking points in history have influenced the Masonic traditions, and even obviously the way in which Rosicrucianism through the Scottish tradition has been either sort of pushed away or embraced based on the way the history has sort of taken its course. But it is very interesting to look at that, and I encourage our listeners to maybe, if you get a spare amount of time, especially if you're Australian, wouldn't hurt to learn more about this civil war in England. It has influenced our system of government here in Australia, and to a great extent the United States. And maybe you can have a look at the Masonic connection there and some of the Rosicrucian.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The way Francis Yates' Rosicrucian Enlightenment kind of turned the academic spotlight onto Rosicrucianism and took it out of its bubble. I think the work of, Trevor Stewart and Matt doing that, and even something like, Snoke and Hanegraaff are really looking at Freemasonry in the broader historical and social and cultural context. And I think that really just makes Masonry for us that much richer. It's no longer this niched thing. We can see our impact, and we can see the attraction that people had to us, or even the revulsion people had to us, in a much broader and very human way. And to me, I love that.
Yeah, I think that's important. I mean, especially to make our organisation more relevant today, we need that human connection. We need to place ourselves in history, because even if it isn't definitive, we did play a role, a significant role, and it's important that people understand that, especially when they're joining. You're told in all the various craft degrees, this is one of the most ancient and honourable orders there is to have ever existed, which is obviously conjecture, but it comes down to the fact that, hey, we did play a role in history. So,
well, we did, and some people took that role very, very seriously. I mean, the history itself is out as to whether or not Freemasonry may have had any real direct involvement in the French Revolution. That is to say that anything that happened really mattered. But we certainly know, and Pasquale's works and the Elus Cohen mentioned this directly, where they absolutely saw at least the esoteric or cult work that they were doing in Lodge being played out in the French Revolution. They certainly saw themselves in that context and as active players within it.
Yeah.
They weren't just cut off and set aside as, this is just something we do every Thursday night.
Yeah, it was as with anything during that period, which I think you've hit the nail on the head there. There's a difference between how we view... One thing we mustn't do is view history through the prism of our own ignorance today. People who did things in those times did them for a reason. It became part of who they were. They weren't just Christians on a Sunday. They weren't just Freemasons on a Thursday. That was part of who they were, right? And I think
exactly
today we tend to look at things through prisms. I play hockey on Sunday. I do football on Wednesdays, and that's just a thing I do on the side. But I'm this person separate to that. But it's very interesting that you hit that on the head. So maybe that's a good way. Maybe we should start looking at ourselves maybe in a more traditional perspective and see Freemasonry as part of our broader life.
Well, I absolutely agree, and that's one of my, that's my big push in terms as a Masonic administrator, at least, is we need to get away from this one night a month argument. And I don't know if they have that in Australia, but they still use it to this day. Someone will say, well, how much time does it take to be a Mason? And there's always someone quick to pipe up, oh, it's just one night a month.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but my obligation exists for the rest of my life.
Yes, it's a life. You're exactly right. You take it as a life obligation. Exactly.
It's meant to be a struggle that we live with and an obligation that we reaffirm every day. It's not unlike marriage in that way. You struggle, you grow, you learn, but every day you're tested and you go back, yes, this individual is worth it, and I recommit myself to them. Yes. I'm not just married on Thursdays.
No, you're not, unfortunately for some. But, thank you for that. Look, what I want to quickly do is we'll round off the conversation now, I think, because you've done an excellent job in addressing all my points. And I'm sure our listeners are just sitting there scratching their head going, what do I need to read next to know more? And I think you would have inspired quite a few people there. But what I want to ask about is an interesting topic. Where do you see the role of Rosicrucianism? I'm going to leave this open-ended. Not just organisationally, I'm talking principally into the lives of Masons, non-Masons, anyone into the future. Where do you see Rosicrucianism going, especially considering the incredible times we're living in, some of the scientific sort of advances we're making? I mean, I was saying in another episode, we've got a rover on Mars, we've got a satellite in Jupiter, we've got another one on a comet somewhere floating around the cosmos. It's incredible times. And what do you see the role of Rosicrucianism in the future in an expanding world of knowledge?
So it's difficult to answer. And what do we define as Rosicrucianism? So it's such a varied manifestation, and I like how Christopher McIntosh relays this. He describes it as a moss that is rolling gathers much moss, and the case of Rosicrucianism, of many hues. So while we can all trace ourselves in theory back to that small group of people in Tübingen in the late 15th century Germany, where Rosicrucianism has gone from there is really broad. So to bring it home from at least a Masonic point of view, I think there's probably two key concepts that we as Masons and Rosicrucians can do. And the first one is to help heal this divide of the antagonism between faith and science, religion and science, faith and reason. In the Rosicrucian mindset, when they wrote those documents, this is before any such formal splits occurred. This is before you had a much more valued breadth of knowledge was placed, or an emphasis was placed upon it, than what we see now with a depth of knowledge in either tradition, be it your religious study or science. And to get rid of that antagonism and to get rid of the warfare and the hate that just comes with it, it is so divisive. And we see it played out on the world stage every day, from local elections to kids who aren't allowed to play with each other. That divide, I think, is very informative of the human condition. And the Rosicrucian movement started with a group of people who didn't see them as being antagonistic. And getting back to that is going to be absolutely crucial.
So by the sounds of it, the role of Rosicrucianism from a Masonic perspective, but even though I think it sounds like anyone could apply this, is about simply bridging those divides, bridging those false dichotomies that we seem to impose on things.
Yeah, absolutely. The second role that I see Rosicrucianism having, at least in the broader sense outside of Masonry, and the Famafet and the Fama, they go through and say, these are the rules of our order. But there's only one that's really a compulsion. The first several are, you're going to pick a successor who will replace you when you die, and we're supposed to be somewhat invisible. We wear the manner and dress of the communities in which we live. We don't have any special mode or habit. But number 4, to cure the sick freely. That's a pretty profound concept.
Absolutely.
And I don't know that many Rosicrucian orders really take that concept as seriously and as practically as they probably should, be it Masonic Rosicrucianism, be it something like a MORC or the Rosicrucian Fellowship. A lot of people get focused on the mystical idea of your relationship with the universe and exploring yourself. But there's a practical commandment that you're given to heal the world freely in whatever ways your skills offer. So if you're a doctor, help those that are put in front of you and do it as humanely and as freely as you can. If you're a teacher, to do that, to find some skill, to find some niche, and make the world a better place than what you found it, to cure the diseases of ignorance, to cure the diseases of hate. That's I don't know how you can get around that. I don't know how you can call yourself a Rosicrucian and not in some way actively embrace that commandment.
That's absolutely fascinating, and that resonates quite profoundly with me. I'm actually in the last semester of my law degree, and one of the things that we have to start thinking about is when we become a lawyer, we could become an officer of the court, and our duties are not just to our clients, they're to justice, and this is sort of these broad notions, and it resonates with me what you've said. It looks like what you're contending is that as people, we need to be willing to contribute to the betterment of society, right? We need to be willing to give ourselves and have a duty to others, not just ourselves. And I think in these troubled times, like you said, it is we have a propensity to be very isolationist and focus on our troubles rather than how can we lend a helping hand. I think that's a very important lesson. All right. Well, I think that we've covered all the major topics there, and I'd like to just give you the opportunity to quickly, if you think we've missed anything there, Jason, anything you want to add to that. Otherwise, I think that's quite good. I think our listeners will be quite happy with that.
Yeah, I mean, for those that are interested and want to go further, I would recommend that before you just run out and start joining self-styled Rosicrucian orders, that you really firm your history up on it. Tobias Churton's books on this are, you can't go wrong with them. Francis Yates' Rosicrucian Enlightenment, like I said before, while it hasn't necessarily stood the test of time within academic circles, the broader principles everyone agrees on. She just gets some of the specifics wrong. It's another essential work. Firm up your history, firm up your understanding of the facts, and then when you've got that foundation, jump in. Find a group, find a community, whether it's Masonic Rosicrucians, whether it's AMORC, whether it's a Rosicrucian Fellowship, what have you. Once you got that foundation, jump in and learn and help.
And take those principles up. Oh, thank you very much. Well, Jason, on behalf of the Brought to Light Masonic podcast and all our brethren here in Australia, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to jump on such short notice. We really appreciate it, and hopefully we can have you back on in the future.
I look forward to it. Thank you so much.
And that was a fantastic interview with Brother Jason Mitchell. And I'd just like to say to Jason, thank you very much for being not only a fantastic person to interview, but also the Brought to Light Masonic podcast's first international correspondent. It's great to have spoken to you about this interesting topic of Rosicrucianism. It's clear that Jason knew his stuff, well-researched and clearly very passionate about Masonic research and Rosicrucianism. And I'm sure our listeners, those both who know very little about Rosicrucianism and those who know quite a bit, will be quite happy with the result of that. I quite enjoyed it and learnt quite a bit. And also just another shout out to Brother Robert Johnson of the Whence Came You Masonic podcast. Thank you very much for putting Brother Mitchell and I in touch. It's been really helpful, considering that we didn't have anyone to speak on this topic at late notice, and it was a great chance for us to at least explore the topic for the benefit of those Australians who may be interested in the Rosicrucian tradition. So, this is it for episode 8 of the Brought to Light Masonic podcast. We'll be ending this episode with a reading out of Manly P. Hall's publication entitled Freemasons and Rosicrucians, the Enlightened, which is a collection of Masonic and Rosicrucian essays he wrote throughout the early 20s. The particular essay I will be reading is called Rosicrucian Doctrines and Tenets, written by Manly P. Hall in 1928, which I hope you'll enjoy. If you have any questions, send us an email on contact@blue.fmvic.com, and until next time, keep safe, stay on the level, and I'm your host, Brother Jack Aquilina. Rosicrucian Doctrines and Tenets, an essay by Manly P. Hall, written in 1928, out of his publication Freemasons and Rosicrucians, the Enlightened, a collection of Masonic and Rosicrucian essays. Trustworthy information is unavailable concerning the actual philosophical beliefs, political aspirations, and humanitarian activities of the Rosicrucian fraternity. Today, as of old, the mysteries of the society are preserved inviolate by virtue of their essential nature, and attempts to interpret Rosicrucian philosophy are all but speculations, anything to the contrary notwithstanding. Evidence points to the probable existence of two distinct Rosicrucian bodies, an inner organisation whose members never revealed their identity or teachings to the world, and an outer body under the supervision of the inner group. In all probability, the symbolic tomb of Christian Rosenkraut, Knight of the Golden Stone, was in reality his outer body, the spirit of which is in a more exalted sphere. For a period of more than a century subsequent to 1614, the outer body circulated tracts and manifestos under either its own name or the names of various initiated members. The purpose of these writings was apparently to confuse and mislead investigators, and thus effectively to conceal the actual designs of the fraternity. When Rosicrucianism became the philosophical fad of the 17th century, numerous documents on the subject were also circulated for purely commercial purposes by impostors desirous of capitalizing on its popularity. The cunningly contrived artifices of the fraternity itself and the blundering literary impostures of charlatans formed a double veil behind which the inner organisation carried on its activities in a manner totally dissimilar to its purposes and principles as publicly disseminated. The Fraternus Rosicrucis naively refers to the misunderstandings which they have, for obvious reasons, permitted to exist concerning themselves as being clouds within which they labour and behind which they are concealed. An inkling of the substance of Rosicrucianism, esoteric doctrines, can be gleaned from an analysis of its shadow, its esoteric writings. In one of the most important of their clouds, the Confessio Fraternitatis, the brethren of the fraternity of Rosicrucians seek to justify their existence and explain the purposes and activities of their order. In its original form, the Confessio is divided into 14 chapters, which are here epitomized. Confessio Fraternitatis Rosicrucian ad Erutius Europae. Chapter 1. Do not through hasty judgment or prejudice misinterpret the statements concerning our fraternity published in our previous manifesto, the Fama Fraternitatis. Jehovah, beholding the decadence of civilization, seeks to redeem humanity by revealing to the willing and by thrusting upon the reluctant of those secrets which previously he had reserved for his elect. By this wisdom the godly shall be saved, but the sorrows of the ungodly shall be multiplied. While the true purpose of our order was set forth in the Fama Fraternitatis, misunderstandings have arisen through which we have been falsely accused of heresy and treason. In this document, we hope to clarify our position so that the learned of Europe will be moved to join us with the dissemination of divine knowledge, according to the will of our illustrious founder. Chapter 2. While it is alleged by many that the philosophy of our day is sound, we declare it to be false, and soon to die of its own inherent weakness. Just as nature, however, provides a remedy for each new disease that manifests itself, so our fraternity has provided a remedy for the infirmities of the world's philosophic system. The secret philosophy of the Rosicrucians is founded upon that knowledge which is the sum and head of all faculties, sciences, and arts. By our divinity revealed system, which partakes much of theology and medicine but little of jurisprudence, we analyse the heavens and the earth, but mostly we study man himself, within whose nature is concealed the supreme secret. If the learned of our day will accept our invitation and join themselves to our fraternity, we will reveal to them undreamed of secrets and wonders concerning the hidden workings of nature. Chapter 3. Do not believe that the secrets discussed in this brief document are lightly esteemed by us. We cannot describe fully the marvels of our fraternity, lest the uninformed be overwhelmed by our astonishing declarations, and the vulgar ridicule the mysteries which they do not comprehend. We also fear that many will be confused by the unexpected generosity of our proclamation, for not understanding the wonders of this sixth age, nor do they realize the great changes which are to come. Like blind men living in a world full of light, they discern only through the sense of feeling. By sight it is implied spiritual cognition, by feeling the material senses. Chapter 4. We firmly believe that through deep meditation on the interventions of human mind and the mysteries of life, through the cooperation of the angels and spirits, and through experience and long observation, our loving Christian father, Christian Rosencrout, was so formally illuminated with God's wisdom that where all the books and writings of the world were lost and the foundations of science overturned, the fraternity of Rosicrucianism could re-establish the structure of world thought upon the foundation of divine truth and integrity. Because of the great depth and perfection of our knowledge, those desiring to understand the mysteries of the fraternity of Rosicrucianism cannot attain to that wisdom immediately, but must grow in understanding and knowledge. Therefore, our fraternity is divided into grades, through which each must ascend step by step to the great Acunium. Now that it has pleased God to lighten unto his sixth candelabrum, it is not better to seek truth in this way than to wander through the labyrinth of worldly ignorance. Furthermore, those who receive this knowledge shall become masters of all arts and crafts. No secret shall be hidden from them, and all good works of the past, present, and future shall be ascertainable to them. The whole world shall become as one book, and the contradictions of science and theology shall be reconciled. Rejoice, O humanity, for the time has come when God has decreed that the number of our fraternity shall be increased, a labour that we have jealously undertaken. The doors of wisdom are now open to the world, but only to those who have earned that privilege. May they present themselves as brothers, for it is forbidden to reveal our knowledge to even our own children. The right to receive spiritual truth cannot be inherited. It must be evolved within the soul of man himself. Chapter 5. Though we may be accused of indiscretion in offering our treasures so freely and promiscuously, without discriminating between the godly, the wise, the prince, the peasant, we affirm that we have not betrayed our trust, for although we have published our Pharma in 5 languages, only those understand it who have that right. Our society is not to be discovered by curiosity seekers, but only by serious and concentrated thinkers. Nevertheless, we have circulated our Pharma in 5 mother tongues, so that the righteous of all nations may have an opportunity to know us, even though they not be scholars. 1,000 times the unworthy may present themselves and clamour at the gate, but God has forbidden us, the fraternity of the Rosy Cross, to hear their voices, and he has surrounded us with his clouds and his projections, so that no harm may come to us. And God has decreed that we of the Order of the Rosy Cross can no longer be seen by mortal eyes, unless they have received strength borrowed from the eagle. We further affirm that we shall not reform the governments of Europe, and patent them according to a system applied by the philosophers of Damkar. All men desirous of seeking knowledge shall receive as much as they are capable of understanding. The rule of false theology shall be overthrown, and God shall make his will known through his chosen philosophers. Chapter 6. Because of the need of brevity, it is enough to say that our father Christian Rosenkraut was born in the year 1378, and departed at the age of 106, leaving us to the labour of spreading the doctrine of philosophy for the entire world. Our fraternity is open to all who sincerely seek for truth, but we publicly warn the false and impious that they cannot betray or injure us, for God has protected our fraternity, and all those who seek to harm shall have their evil designs return and destroy them, while the treasures of our fraternity shall remain untouched, and be used by the Lion in the establishment of his kingdom. Chapter 7. We declare that God, before the end of the world, shall create a giant flood of spiritual light to alleviate the sufferings of humankind. Falsehood and darkness, which have crept into the arts, sciences, religions, and governments of humanity, making it difficult for even the wise to discover the path of reality, shall be forever removed, and a single standard established, so that all may enjoy the fruitage of truth. We shall not be recognized as those responsible for this change, for people shall say that it is the result of the progressiveness of our age. Great are the reforms about to take place, but we of the fraternity of the Rosy Cross do not claim to ourselves the glory for this divine reformation, since many there are not members of our fraternity, but honest, true, and wise men, by whom their own intelligence and their writings shall hasten this coming. We testify that sooner the stones shall rise up and offer their services than there shall be any lack of righteous person to execute the will of God upon earth. Chapter 8. That no one may doubt, we declare that God has sent messages and signs in the heavens, namely the new stars in Sempronius and Cygnus, to show the great council of the elect is to take place. This proves that God reveals in visible nature, for the discerning few, signs and symbols of all things that are coming to pass. God has given man 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, 2 ears, but only 1 tongue. Whereas the eyes, the nostrils, and the ears admit the wisdom of nature into his mind, the tongue alone may give it forth. In various ages there have been illuminated ones who have seen, smelt, tasted, heard the will of God. But it will shortly come to pass for those who have seen, smelt, tasted, heard, and shall speak, and the truth shall be revealed. Before this revelation of righteousness is possible, however, the world must sleep away the intoxication of her poisoned chalice, filled with the false life of theological wine, and opening her heart to virtue and understanding, welcoming the Son of Truth. Chapter 9. We have a magic writing, copied from that divine alphabet for which God writes his will upon the face of the celestial and terrestrial nature. With this new language we read God's will for all his creatures, and just as astronomers predict eclipses, so we procrastinate the obscurities of the Church, and how long shall they last? Our language is like unto that of Adam and Enoch before the fall, and though we understand and can explain our mysteries in this our sacred language, we cannot do so in Latin, a tongue contaminated by the confusion of Babylon. Chapter 10. Although there are still certain powerful persons who oppose and hinder us, because of which we must remain concealed, we exhort those who would become to our fraternity to study unceasingly the sacred scriptures, for such as to do this cannot be far from us. We don't mean the Bible should be continually in the mouth of man, but that he should search for its truth and eternal meaning, which is seldom discovered by theologians, scientists, or mathematicians, because they are blinded by the opinions of their sects. We bear witness that never since the beginning of the world has there ever been given to man a more excellent book than the Holy Bible. Blessed is he who possesses it, more blessed is he who reads it, and most blessed is he who understands it, and most godlike is he who obeys it. Chapter 11. We wish the statements we made in the Fama Fraternitatis concerning the transmutation of metals in the universal medicine to be lightly understood. While we realize that both these works are attainable by man, we fear that many really great minds may be led away from the true quest of knowledge and understanding if they permit themselves to limit their investigation into the transmutation of metals. When to a man is given power to heal disease, to overcome poverty, and to reach a position of worldly dignity, that man is beset by numerous temptations, and unless he possesses true knowledge and full understanding, he will become a terrible menace to mankind. The alchemist who attains to the art of transmutation-based metals can do all manner of evil unless he understands that he is as great as a self-created wealth. We therefore affirm that man must first gain knowledge, virtue, and understanding, then all other things may be added to him. We accuse the Christian Church of its greatest sin, of possessing power and using it unwisely. Therefore we prophesy that it shall fall by the weight of its own iniquities, and its crown shall be brought to naught. Chapter 12. In concluding our Confessio, we earnestly admonish you to cast aside the worthless books of pseudo-alchemists and philosophers, of whom there are many in our age, who make light of the Holy Trinity, and deceive the credulous with meaningless enigmas. One of the greatest of this is a stage player, a man with sufficiently ingenuity for imposition. Such men are mingled by the enemy of humanity among those who seek to do good, thus making truth more difficult of discovery. Believe us, truth is simple and unconcealed, whilst falsehood is complex, deeply hidden, proud, and its worldly knowledge seemingly a glitter of the godly lustre, it often is mistaken for divine wisdom. You that are wise will turn from these false teachings and come to us, who seek not your money, but freely offer you our greatest treasure. We desire not your goods, but that you should become a partaker of our goods. We do not desire parables, but invite you to understand all parables and all secrets. We do not ask you to receive us, but invite you to come unto our kindly houses and palaces, not because of ourselves, but because we are ordered by the Spirit of God, the desire of our most excellent Father, Christian Rosencrout, and the need of the present moment, which is very great. Chapter 13. Now that we have made our position clear, that we sincerely confess Christ, disavow the papacy, devote our lives to true philosophy and worthy living, and daily invite and admit into our fraternity the worthy of all nations, who thereafter share with us the light of God, will you not join yourselves with us to perfect yourselves, the development of all the arts, and the service of the world? If you will take this step, the treasures of every part of the earth shall be at one time given unto you, and the darkness which envelops human knowledge, and which results in the vanities of material arts and sciences, shall forever be dispelled. Chapter 14. Again, we warn those who are dazzled by the glitter of gold, or those who now upright might be turned by great riches into a life of idleness and pomp, not to disturb our sacred silence with their clamourings. For though there be a medicine which will cure all diseases, and give unto all men wisdom, yet it is against the will of God that men should attain to understand by any means other than virtue, labour, and integrity. We are not permitted to manifest ourselves to any man except it be by the will of God. Those who believe that they can partake of our spiritual wealth against the will of God or without his sanction will find that they shall sooner lose their lives in seeking us than attempt or attain happiness by finding us. Fraternitatis as Rosicrucian.
You've been listening to the Brought to Light Masonic Podcast, bringing you to light through discussions and research papers about Australian Freemasonry and the Victorian jurisdiction in particular. We look forward to speaking to you on our next edition, and until then, we are happy to meet, sorry to part, and happy to meet again.